You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast. Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Silver Screen Science.
Woohoo!
This is our series where we talk about the science of movies. This episode, we are discussing Jurassic World Dominion.
Less woohoo.
Well, this is the latest film in the Jurassic World franchise, the third of the Jurassic World trilogy, as it were. For those of you who are new to Silver Screen Science, or those of you who have forgotten, what we do in this series is discuss the science of movies, but not just the nitpicky, what they got right, what they got wrong. More particularly, we are interested in how science and scientific concepts are represented in movies. How do movies how do they depict these concepts when they try to do so? Where does Jurassic World Dominion fit in that cross-section of science and pop culture? Jurassic World Dominion was released this month, June 2022, from Universal Pictures, directed by Colin Trevorrow, same guy who did the last two.
Mm-hmm.
And this, dear listeners, is your official spoiler warning. We are going to be discussing the entire film, and we are absolutely going to be talking about major plot points and stuff that happens at the end of the movie.
Yes.
That's going to be important.
Lots and lots to say scientifically. Like, they touch on a bunch of things that happen at the end of the film or are big reveals or whatever.
Yes. So, Will, would you like to give us a brief synopsis of the movie?
Happily. So, following the last film, where a bunch of dinosaurs were released into the wild instead of being gassed to death, we now have a world where dinosaurs are intermingled with our wild habitats, and due to a black market trade, globally intermingled. They have been spread across basically every continent as far as the intro to the film shows, and a new shady corporation, Biosynth, has been given the task of starting to corral and starting to house and begin to handle this problem.
Yeah. For clarification, Biosyn was around since the first Jurassic Park. Now they're back.
Yes.
Now it's the big deal evil corporation of this movie.
Absolutely. Also, in line with parallel with all of this, there's a new plague of giant locusts eating the crops all over the country, our country, North America at first, and causing major havoc. And our protagonists are brought into it because Biosyn has kidnapped Macy, the clone child from the last film, and is believed to be responsible for said locusts. So all the heroes are coming from different directions to take down the bad billionaire. And that's basically what they do.
And there's a bunch of dinosaurs.
And then there's dinosaurs.
Also, there are dinosaurs in
here
this
and there,
dinosaur movie.
Which is, that's how it feels. And then there are some dinosaurs.
So we are going to discuss the science. If, by chance, you are interested in our personal thoughts about the movie, non-science-y, just moviegoer thoughts, we will also be releasing a More Thoughts episode on our Patreon for patrons among their bonus audio that they get to listen to. So check that out. Let's talk scientific concepts. Let's talk scientists. But first, as is our tradition, let's talk about the animals in the movie.
Which there are a bunch of.
There are tons. In fact, we're not going to list all of them.
No.
Which we've done in the past. But there are so many ancient animals represented in this movie.
This is almost surely the most chock-a-block of all the films yet for just number of species.
There's a bunch of classic Jurassic Park / Jurassic World stuff. We get Tyrannosaurus, we get Velociraptors, we get Dilophosaurus. There's at least a couple different sauropods. There's at least, I think there's supposed to be 3 different ceratopsians, horned dinosaurs, stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, bunches of the old school.
Bunch of the old pterosaurs we've seen.
Yep, yeah, Dimorphodon, Pteranodon, the Compsognathus are in there.
Yep.
There are some new things that are new. Some of them were in the prologue thing that we discussed at the end of last year. These include Giganotosaurus, which is the new biggest carnivore that ever lived for this particular Jurassic Park movie.
Yep.
Allosaurus shows up. Atrociraptor shows up for a chase scene in Malta, I think is where that takes place.
Yes.
Moros, the little fuzzy theropod dinosaur. Allosaurus makes a brief appearance. Pyroraptor in full feathered regalia, and also it swims. And Therizinosaurus, with its big long claws and all of its other stuff, There's also a bunch of stuff that isn't ancient reptile stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not dinosaurs, not pterosaurs. Oh, the mosasaur is also in this movie. But we also have Dimetrodon,
Yep.
early synapsid, a Dicynodont that I've seen identified as Lystrosaurus, the sort of the beaked, sometimes tusked early mammal cousins. And, of course, very central to the plot, giant prehistoric locusts.
Or at least locusts that have been modified with prehistoric DNA. They never made it clear whether these were supposed to be resurrected,
right,
cloned locusts.
It sounded like they were meant. It was, we have given them ancient DNA.
Yes.
Which has made them giant and terrifying.
Exactly. So it sounded like they took locusts and spliced in some DNA from something extinct. Like, they don't say what it is. Just Cretaceous DNA, I think, is what's said at one point.
Yes, I think they say Cretaceous DNA. I saw one movie reviewer refer to them as dinosaur locusts.
Yes.
Which I think is probably the mentality that the filmmakers had when creating these creatures.
That's definitely the feeling I got from the film, is just, well, we took DNA from these big, awesome animals and put them into locusts. Obviously, that's why they're so big and awesome now.
Which, right off the bat, is tapping into one of those very common misconceptions about paleontology, that relating ancient things to big and scary and powerful, that just all the things in the past were bigger and scarier and worse, and that just by virtue of being prehistoric, or even just having prehistoric DNA in them, these locusts are bigger and stronger and worse than they otherwise would be.
Exactly.
That's actually a really common trope.
Oh, yes.
In paleontology-related media.
Well, it's a very similar, it's a more complicated version of it, but it feels basically like the old cartoon de-evolution rays. I mean, I've seen those show up in Johnny Quest type stuff, all the way to just silly versions.
Oh, yeah. They were in the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Yeah. That's basically just, this is a array that takes you back to your prehistoric origins, which always means turns you into the bigger, badder, more intimidating version of whatever you are. Because everything in the past was big, bad,
was monsters.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Which brings us to the topic we talk about all the time in Silver Screen Science, the phenomenon that we like to call monsterification.
Yes.
We've talked about this all throughout the Jurassic Park franchise. This is our term, and we're not the only ones that I've seen this term used elsewhere.
Yeah.
For when a movie or other form of fictional media takes a thing that would otherwise be a normal animal and gives it behaviors or traits that make it more fitting for a movie monster and less reasonable as an actual living creature.
Yes.
This movie might be the most monsterified of any of the movies in the franchise.
I'd say so.
There is very little believable animal behavior in this movie. And they have gone full-on monsters with basically all the creatures.
Yeah, even when they're not doing something scary or dangerous, they have distilled all the dinosaurs and all the creatures down to these very, very simplistic, very convenient behaviors, very dramatic behaviors. And it's nonstop through the whole film. Even the ones that we're supposed to sympathize with, like Blue and Blue's baby, Beta, who is one of the
clone
features.
Baby. Yeah. Blue, it's so funny because Blue is the mother and now she has a child and we're going to save the child.
And our main characters are friends with the baby.
Yes, but just like the last couple movies, every second Blue's on screen, it's tense because she's on the verge of murdering the humans that I guess are kind of supposed to be her friends.
Yep.
And she's screeching and roaring and screaming. And even the ones we're supposed to like they're just monstery.
Well, and even the baby, there was two scenes that stood out to me about the baby.
Yeah.
Like, the baby is supposed to be cute, but they're still like, oh, it's a raptor. It's dangerous. And the way they show that is two different scenes. One at the very beginning, when Blue and Beta are hunting and they see a rabbit, and they're sneaking up on the rabbit, and then a wolf comes out of nowhere and tackles the rabbit instead.
Yes.
And then Beta, who is about the size of a large chicken,
very small,
not very big at all, tackles the full-grown, what looked to be like a timber wolf, and attacks it. We don't see what happens,
But Beta comes back.
We just are shown a scene to be like, well, Beta's so ferocious at this young age. It's taking on full-grown wolves, which weigh about the same amount as a full-grown human. Like, that's a...
Or a full-grown velociraptor.
Yeah, like, that's a big animal. So they have that scene, and then at the end when they're trying to get Beta back,
yes,
they get it.
Chris Pratt, Owen, Alan Grant, the old school cast comes back, by the way.
Yes.
And so we see Grant, Sattler, and Malcolm, and we've got Owen, Claire, Clone Girl, Maisie, and then some other people. So Owen, Grant, and Maisie are trying to recapture Beta, who is loose in the facility.
Yes, and they do the whole put the hand out thing, which is something that we will also talk about.
Yep.
Because that gets overused in this film. But they put the hand out, and they're distracting Beta while Owen tries to get a shot at the neck.
With a tranquilizer.
With a tranquilizer to be able to capture Beta and bring her back to Blue. And the way he gets the shot is when Beta full-on charges Dr. Grant.
Yes, with intent to kill.
A full-grown human standing completely upright, just going for his ankles, I guess.
Yeah. That is something continuous through this movie, that what the animals do is attack people.
Yes.
Attack things. A lot of dinosaurs and other animals in this movie are on screen for about 3 minutes. Just long enough to attack people.
Yep, just to remind us that they're dangerous.
Quetzalcoatlus shows up, attacks a cargo plane, tears it apart with its super strength, right? Sticks its fingers through the glass and drags its thin-boned beak through the metal of the plane, and then flies away.
Yeah, just leaves.
Having done what it came to do.
Yeah, having inflicted violence.
Yep. It's also enormous.
Oh, yeah.
Much like the Mosasaur. The Mosasaur also is on screen for about 10 seconds attacking stuff. Even Therizinosaurus.
Yes.
Therizinosaurus, we see really do 3 things the entire movie. It's barely on screen. It, for no reason, just demolishes a deer.
Yep.
Just whacks it, takes it out, just because that's what it does as a dinosaur. It terrorizes Claire, threatening to, I guess, bite her head off or something.
Or stab her, or just smack her around too, I guess.
And then it, and we gave you a spoiler warning, impales the Giganotosaurus on its Wolverine claws.
Yep.
At the end of the movie. And here's another thing. So we've talked about monsterification traits in terms of just hyper-violence and super strength and all that. The thing that got me in the Therizinosaurus scene, and this is not new, they have literally been doing this since the first movie, but it really stood out to me in the Therizinosaurus scene. In this movie, every time a large animal's foot touches the ground, there is a thunderous footstep.
Yeah.
Just doom. And I think it really stood out to me in the Therizinosaur scene, because Claire is crawling into the water, and behind her, the Therizinosaur is very slowly coming in that direction.
Yeah, they have a scene implying that the Therizinosaurus is blind, and that's why it's creeping instead of lunging.
Right. And every one of its slow, cautious footsteps creates a boom shockwave.
Yeah.
And it was just very silly to me.
It was, they do a lot of that. There's
the Locusts, of course.
Yes.
Are like, every time the Locusts are on screen, people are freaking out because the Locusts are just, they're flying all over, and they're terrifying, even though they never do anything to anybody.
Yeah, like, I was very confused by why they kept trying to make the Locusts scary, because Locusts absolutely, can be intimidating and will eat meat. Like,
sure, and they're big. So, like, yeah, if you're afraid of bugs, that's unnerving, sure.
But the movie never shows us them do anything to anyone.
No, the big threat that they pose, according to the script, is that they are ravenously eating crops, and they're going to cause a famine.
That they're eating our food stocks and the food stocks for livestock. But
they are framed by the movie, by the camera work, by the actors' reactions to them, very much the same way as the pterosaurs in that scene in the middle of Jurassic World, where it's just demons filling the air.
Well, what they treat them like is the scarab beetles from the Mummy films.
Yes.
Is that it's like, they just swarm, and everyone is terrified. These are the scariest, but we never, we don't even see them bite someone.
No, they don't do anything.
Like, the worst they do is tear up a bit of the clothes on a few of the characters one time.
Yes.
Which could just as well, if you know what locusts and grasshoppers are like, just as well be from their spiky feet. Like, that's what I would actually expect that was from.
It was an accident. It got caught on the feet.
I climbed on you and jumped off of you and tore your clothes because I'm a foot long.
They do successfully break through windows.
Yes, they do.
As all monstery things must be able to do.
One even punches the hole in a barn door.
A wooden barn door.
Through a wooden plank.
Yep. Incidentally, I was thinking about this. We have noted this throughout the entire franchise, and I don't... You might remember better than me. We only saw the movie once in the theaters. I don't think we got a velociraptor jumping through glass in this movie.
No, not a velociraptor, because the Atrociraptors...
The Atrociraptors do. Dilophosaurus, there is a scene later in the movie where Dilophosaurus punches through glass, and it was so odd to me, because usually when a dinosaur in these movies punches through glass, it's like a jump.
Yeah, my whole body, like I'm football tackling through the glass.
This animal just kind of like gently pushes its face through the window, and it shatters. And it was very amusing to me.
Yeah, I don't think we actually did get a velociraptor.
This might be the first movie in the franchise that we don't get the patented velociraptor through glass.
Yeah.
Although we do get other dinosaurs and ancient dinosaur bugs.
I'm trying to think if Beta does it when she's escaping the lab.
You know what?
I think she might jump through a window.
She definitely breaks a bunch of like beakers and stuff. So she does break glass. That's a good point. She might have jumped through the glass.
Yeah.
I'm not going to watch this movie again, so somebody who remembers, please let us know.
This will be a mystery for all time as far as we're concerned.
Let us know if we're forgetting something.
So yeah, lots of monstrification. They also do it with a bunch of the animals, that make a little... Like Therizinosaurus being menacing. I mean, it's a big herbivore, and it's not that big herbivores can't be dangerous, but it'd be like a Triceratops sneaking up on someone.
Well, it's like a bison stalking.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not why bison are scary.
No.
That's not why they're dangerous.
You're adding a behavior to them that does not fit.
Right. You're making it a serial killer.
Yes.
It is a movie serial killer.
But then you also have things like the Dicynodont bites a person.
Yep, just a person's hand comes close enough to it and it just bites it. And not like a get away from me nip.
No, like locked on.
Bites and then is, I guess, eating his hand.
Yeah, just holding on. And
like, it is shown to be just as ferocious as the predatory animals.
Yeah, as the young Carnotaurus on the other hand.
Also biting this person.
And like, you could be like, it was abused or whatnot, and that's why it's aggressive, but they take blatantly non-carnivorous animals and give them very predatory behaviors.
Yes.
Yeah, and then they also take a bunch and they're like Dimetrodons in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't do anything interesting. They just run at the protagonist with their mouths open.
Yes.
The whole
big,
time.
scary teeth.
Just running straight at them. There's nothing behavioral there. It's just like big sailed Pac-Men.
This movie is using basically all the tricks in the Monsterification book. The ridiculous noises, odd behaviors, hyper-violence, super strength punching through glass, hyper-focus on the things that they're trying to attack. They also do the simple-minded, the sort of single-minded thing.
Yep.
Which brings us back to your comment about Owen's hand thing.
Yeah, they have a number of times where they show that the animals just have this robotic response to certain stimuli.
Mm-hmm.
Owen does his hold the hands out to still the raptors in Jurassic World.
Right.
These are the raptors he's been working with.
Yeah, he's trained these raptors, and that's what I assumed that was about. Is that this is a signal he has worked out with the raptors, that he holds his hand out and it gives them pause.
Exactly. And, that became shorthand for his interactions with Blue.
Right.
In the rest of that film and in Fallen Kingdom. That when he and Blue would come face to face, he'd put that hand out and it would remind Blue that he is I think he says he's the alpha, that he's
in charge.
He's the one in charge. He's the pack leader. Fine. That's all fine. They do that hand thing to almost every dinosaur they have a face-to-face encounter with in this film.
Yeah, he does it with Parasaurolophus.
Yeah.
He does it with the Carnotaurus.
Yeah.
I think it's both Carnotaurus and Allosaurus.
Yeah, he holds them there for a second so they can dodge out of the way.
Yep.
He does it just over and over and over.
Now it's a thing that all the dinosaurs respond to,
Yeah.
I guess.
And it drove me crazy with the Parasaurolophus, because it literally, he does it up until he can finally pet the Parasaurolophus's snout and calm it down. And I didn't realize they made a fourth How to Train Your Dragon.
I have seen other people make that comparison.
It was exactly the same.
It is just like How to Train Your Dragon.
He didn't close his eyes and look away like you're supposed to, because he's a hack. But
because he doesn't know what he's doing.
he wouldn't survive with real dragons.
He didn't read that book.
But like, it just is the exact same mentality. And in How to Train Your Dragon, that's an animated movie,
right?
With goofy-looking pot-bellied dragons that buzz their wings like a dragon, like a bee.
And they also they go very much on like, here are the simple ways that dragons will always respond.
Dragons work these ways. They have a certain number of fire shots. They get dizzy if you make noise. It's a
movie
cartoon.
Is doing that. It's very video gamey. It's like what we've said before about the blood in the water trope.
Yep.
That if there's blood in the water, the sharks will react because they can't help it.
Yeah, it's like a video game Spawn. That's how you trigger the shark event.
And this is another common monster trope among animals in media, is a stimulus that always invokes a reaction because the animals are hardwired. The other one they do in this movie is the flare.
Yes.
Which was another one that was so odd because so in the first movie, right? Ian and Grant use the flares to distract the T-Rex in a moment to take advantage of its fixation on movement, and it works briefly, and then that's it. That's the end of that.
Yes.
In Jurassic World, they call back to that when Claire uses the flare to bring the T-Rex to have its big kaiju fight with Indominus.
They also use it to signal the feeding for the Rex. They drop the flare next to the goat.
Yes, in Jurassic World, they did do that.
Now, that's the same T-Rex.
Yes, that's Rexy.
That's Rexy. That is the same T-Rex who already responded to flares.
In this movie, they use the flare to distract Giganotosaurus. They use a makeshift flare to attract Giganotosaurus and make it go the direction they want it to.
Yeah.
They used it... What was the other... they used it for the sauropod.
Yep. At the beginning, there were sauropods that were stopping the work on a lumber facility because they just wandered in.
To get them to leave, they have a guy with a flare on the back of a truck who leads them away.
And they just are immediately like, oh, a flare!
I guess that's how all the dinosaurs... It is that's very single-minded, simplistic behavior that turns animals into monsters.
It's all that moth DNA they included.
Yes. Oh man, that's going to be on a page somewhere. It's actually because of that ancient moth DNA.
Yeah, right? Well, we had to fill in the gaps for their silk-making genes.
Another thing that comes up with the animals, and this sort of leads us more into our scientific concepts, is the notion of apex predator.
Yes.
So this is another thing that will often happen in movies like this, where they will misuse a term.
Yep.
In a way that makes it more dramatic. It's the way that alpha gets used in movies all the time, where it's, what is the alpha? The alpha is the one who's in charge, and it kills everybody else, and it's the one that is the dominant, and blah, 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 even though that's not a thing really in nature.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times it's because they are taking part of the term and using a different definition for one of the words.
Yes.
Like queen bee, it gets portrayed all the time that the queen is in charge of the hive, and that's not true.
Right, like a queen, a monarch.
Exactly. Queen bees and ants don't tell the other ants what to do.
No.
If the other ants don't like that queen, they murder that queen.
Yes.
The queen lays eggs. That's what a queen ant and bee does.
In this movie, they and it's only briefly, but it is in a dramatic central scene. They use the term apex predator. They describe Giganotosaurus. So Giganotosaurus and T-Rex meet each other early in the movie. And I think it's Claire. It's Kayla.
Yes.
DeWanda Wise's character, who's awesome.
Oh, yeah. The pilot of the
pilot.
Cool character.
She makes a comment about two apex predators in an ecosystem. Soon there will only be one.
Yes.
Which is a very common way for fictional media to use the term apex predator. That an apex predator is like Godzilla.
Yes.
The one above all others is the apex.
And that's exactly. They're using that definition of apex. That apex means you are at the pinnacle.
Yes. But that's not what an apex predator is.
No.
An apex predator is just a predator who, as an adult, a species that as an adult is rarely preyed upon,
Mm-hmm.
and can hunt basically anything else in its ecosystem. It's the one at the highest trophic level.
Yes.
It eats everything below it. You can have multiple apex predators in an ecosystem.
It happens all the time.
All the time. In the spirit of the month, there are often multiple croc species in an ecosystem, and they are apex predators.
Well, in South America is a great example where you have the anaconda, the jaguar, and multiple croc species, multiple caiman species.
Yeah, those are all apex predators.
All of those are apex predators. When they're all full grown, none of them eat each other.
Yes, and they can eat almost anything else that they want.
Yes.
So this movie is doing that very common science trope in film of using these terms. Now, I will say that scene surprised the heck out of me because, and I think this is the first time, maybe the first time this has ever happened in this franchise. I could be wrong about that. Giganotosaurus and T-Rex see each other, and they're about to have a fight over a deer carcass, I guess.
Yep.
A tiny little, whatever. And then it's set up, all right, here's our big dino fight, and they bite each other a bit, and then T-Rex walks away.
Yep.
And I was astonished.
That's how you should do it.
That was a very, reasonably realistic predator confrontation.
Yeah. The fight was a bit more aggressive and exciting than it would actually be. They'd probably roar at each other.
Sure, and they bite a bunch and they're very violent about it.
But a small conflict with one of them turning tail, that's how most predator to predator interactions goes.
Yeah. That was actually a really fairly realistic depiction of a predator encounter.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, later in the movie, they have a big cage fight.
Yes.
Even though they're, I guess, under mind control at the time.
Well, and that is also one of those where not only do they have the fight, but there's not even a deer carcass. Like, it's just...
No, they just see each other and
decide
fight.
Enough has been enough. They have to kill each other.
They decide the end of the movie's coming up. One of us has to die. So... just like any real-life predator would do, T-Rex hurls Giganotosaurus onto the waiting claws of Therizinosaurus, impaling it and killing it.
Yes. And then Therizinosaurus and T-Rex are fine.
Right, and then they roar triumphantly next to each other.
Yeah, they had no beef. Giganotosaurus just didn't know when to stop, evidently.
That was the Joker of the movie, as we've been told.
Yes, that is literally how it was described by Trevorrow, is that it was...
Wants to watch the world burn.
That they just wanted a dinosaur fueled by hate. And that's and indeed, literally what the goal was.
It does get to watch the world burn, because the Locusts are also monstery enough to be on fire and just fly around like that.
They fly around long enough until they slowly die one by one out of the swarm, raining fiery corpses upon the forest.
Right, much like the anaconda from Anaconda.
Yes.
That being on fire is a minor inconvenience for these.
Yep.
Well, they got the same genes that Baryonyx used.
Oh, yeah.
In the last movie to stick its face through lava.
Yeah, yep.
Now, I guess we should also make a comment when we're talking about animals and accuracy. There are a bunch of feathers in the movie.
Yes.
Moros has feathers and they look pretty cool. Pyroraptors got feathers and they look pretty cool. Therizinosaurus is fully feathered and big and scary.
And they do make a comment to explain this new presence of feathers in the film.
Yes.
That Biosyn has now perfected the cloning technique and are no longer... putting in genes to fill the gaps. They are cloning...
Ramsey says they're as pure as they can be.
They are pure as they can be, and they use Moros as that standing example of this small, fully feathered little theropod. And all the feathered dinosaurs we see are new species.
Yes, Quetzalcoatlus is all fuzzy. So they do actually draw this line where they're saying, these are the... realistic for this franchise.
Visually realistic.
These are the ones that we changed that one incorrect aspect of some of their appearance.
Yes.
We didn't change any of the other parts, but this one aspect we've changed because they are pure DNA.
I did notice with Pyroraptor, though, that it was holding its hands sideways and folding them.
That is true.
Yeah, it wasn't doing the sneaker, my palms down Velociraptor pose that... all the others were still doing. It had its hands in an anatomically more correct position.
So they put some effort into
yeah. So they did think through that aspect a little bit. Now, they also then have Pyroraptor swim like a penguin.
Yeah, well, it swims, but it doesn't actually swim like a penguin because it does the side-to-side motion.
Oh, I see. I didn't notice. I saw it flapping its wing arms a bunch.
It flaps its wing arms, but it also does the side-to-side gator... well, it's not even a gator swim. It's a shark swim.
Yeah.
Even though its tail feathers are broad and flat like a dolphin tail.
Yeah. Yeah, I missed that.
Yeah. It's... Yeah. That was the dinosaurs are just kind of doing whatever they want to do for the movie.
Well, and also, like, it swims under a frozen lake, which is another one of those where...
And it punches its way up through the lake with such force that it leaps up through the ice.
Like a video game character.
Like a video game character, yes. The dinosaurs in this movie are movie monsters. They are... A lot of them feel more suited for a Godzilla movie than for a movie about actual dinosaurs. Which is nothing new in this franchise.
No.
We are monsterified as we have always been.
We expected this, but this movie definitely... Well, what this movie does that at least Jurassic World still attempted to maintain is that this movie gets rid of any of the semblance that they're animals.
Yes.
Like, it really does... There's a couple of scenes where, like, we see Dreadnoughtus just lounging in a pond, eating plants. Which is another one of those where it's like, it's a pretty scene, but also, are you doing that just because it's pretty or because it's a sauropod and you put it in water because that's the classic way to show them?
That's the classic trope.
So, like, we have a couple of moments like that, but we don't really have any moments of just acknowledging...
Animals being animals.
Yeah, like, the only time we get that are exposition scenes of showing them, the ones that have gotten out into the wild, running alongside horses and, flying in the night. Like, that's the only time we never get any interactions that capture that these are animals. Every single plot significant scene of the dinosaurs is 100% monsterified. Yeah. I can't think of one that isn't, at least.
Yeah.
And so they really just ditched we established in a few films ago that they're animals. We don't need to establish that again. It's kind of how it feels.
Well, let us continue to transition into talking about the scientific concepts. So this is another thing we always like to look at, is not just your animal depictions, but what scientific ideas come up in this film. Now, obviously, a lot of the stuff that we've discussed before in this franchise, right, using genetic material to reconstruct ancient animals, is a thing here. Here, there's much more discussion about genetic editing and purity of DNA and stuff like that. They use the term genetic power.
Yeah.
Again, which is
over
one
and
that
over.
They've borrowed from the original Jurassic Park, where Malcolm is back in this movie to tell us that genetic power is bad because it's basically nukes. And it's funny because this is one of the things, one of my biggest misgivings about the first Jurassic Park is this very heavy-handed message in the movie that scientists using new impressive techniques and technologies is inherently dangerous.
Yes.
Because it's going to go wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that concept that scientists are always just a moment away from overstepping.
Yes, and indeed, I see Jurassic Park as one of the most frequently referenced examples when people are having conversations about, you shouldn't do that. You've seen Jurassic Park, stuff goes wrong.
Yep.
Your scientists were so concerned with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should. It is this, again, a very, very common movie trope of science as inherently dangerous and irresponsible.
That we have tampered with something we were never meant to tamper with, and ergo, by the fundamental laws of science or karma or whatever, that there will be a comeuppance.
Yes.
That there will be a bill due.
The bill comes due.
That regardless, if when we dip our toes into realms that humans were not meant to walk, things are going to go wrong, which is a fair, like there is an aspect of that is
right. Well, we should be careful.
Yes,
we should always be careful. We should be ethical. Right? We should
exactly
keep these things in mind.
There should be a healthy level of caution and
self-restraint, apprehension.
when we deal with something brand new that has potentially grand consequences or implications or applications. You know, the first time we make nanotech, yeah, we should be wary of what all are we unboxing with this and how do we want to go about it?
And how might this be used irresponsibly?
Yes.
And that is something that is interesting that comes up in this movie. This film highlights, it takes the original concept of we've cloned dinosaurs. We've brought them back to life using ancient DNA. And this movie has taken that several steps down the line to say, that is an incredible feat of genetic engineering. What else could be being done with that technology?
Yes.
So we've got human cloning, which was introduced in the last movie, and this movie just the briefest of touching upon the implications of that. It doesn't really talk about it. A person calls another human being intellectual property.
Yes.
Which is a very, you could make a whole movie about that.
Absolutely. Like, there is a film about that where there's the clones for celebrities. For organ transfer.
Was that the plot of Altered Carbon?
Not quite.
Okay. I'm thinking of something different.
Yeah, in that one they had cloned backups.
That's what it was.
They could download their
I've just got Deechin Lackman on my brain because I didn't know she was in this movie and she showed up and I was like, oh, something ridiculous is about to happen because it always does when this person is on screen.
Yep. And so there's interesting dialogues to be had, and they apply some of those ideas, but it doesn't really get discussed heavily. We
see good scientists trying to utilize this genetic power for curing disease and such. At least we are told that is a thing that we could do.
Yes.
But we don't actually see it. The bad scientists have genetically engineered a dangerous plague of locusts
that only eat competitors' crops.
Yes. Whether or not that was the intent, I feel like was a little bit ambiguous.
Yeah, I think it was in the intent that they would not eat biosyn seeded crops. You know, that they would eat the competitors out of business and they would have control over the world food source. From what I got with the movie, the mistake was that the locusts were reproducing and not dying at the rate that they thought they would.
Gotcha. So they got out of control.
It became a literal plague instead of just a new pest. Right. Which is an interesting, but it doesn't really get, it's kind of like what they did with the last one of weaponizing the dinosaurs, where they talk about it, but they don't really go into the complexity and morals of that.
This movie does very similar of this person has done a bad thing with the science, and that is bad. And these people are trying to do a good thing with the science, and that is good. We also have people doing stuff that is just kind of stuff to do, I guess.
Yeah.
Like a character makes herself a clone.
Yep.
Because she could.
Yeah. They never really go into there's not that same level of discussion.
Right.
The first two films.
Yes. This concept of the implications of genetic power and genetic technology isn't really a central theme of this movie. It's the backdrop, typically at best.
Yes. The other reason that, backing up a little in the conversation to that concept of inevitable overstep by scientists, the other reason that's hilarious to me whenever it's brought up in movies as just a given is that they treat it like it's this obvious thing, like, how did you not know you were going too far? Right. You know, I flew all the way to this island on this mechanical flying machine with whirling blades to watch a computerized image tell me the science that you've done. At what point, people have said that every single time. When the printing press was made, people are going to not remember things anymore if we can write it down and make books.
Right.
Why would you even have to use your brain? We've always done that. So though the cautionary tale isn't unwarranted, that sense of given hubris whenever a scientist touches on a topic that is edgy for today.
Right. Well, and I think that what these movies have done, basically the whole franchise, and this movie does it as well, is you introduce these concepts. You say genetic engineering and big scary idea, you have a character like Malcolm question the ethics and say, oh, this could go wrong, and then you have stuff go wrong, but often not actually because of the scientific applications.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the stuff that goes wrong in these movies is rarely because the kind of genetic experimentation you're doing is unethical or inappropriate. It's because you built a shoddy zoo.
Yes.
Or your lab practices are terrible. Like, at the end of this movie, the whole preserve area gets lit on fire.
Yeah.
And is destroyed, not because there were, like, unethical scientific, oh, we didn't think about what this power would mean. Oh, it's because the lab's procedure for destroying the locusts was to set their own building on fire.
Yeah, to ignite a bunch of automated flamethrowers.
Yeah. So the genetic power, as they keep... that phrase is so silly. The genetic power that they are wielding in this movie is not why everything goes wrong.
Yes.
It's because you are doing things without regulation and without forethought, much like in the previous movies where it's like, there was nothing wrong with resurrecting these ancient animals like that. That in and of itself does not cause catastrophe.
Mm-mm.
What causes catastrophe is that in the movie they are monstrous, hyper-violent beings, and you didn't put any real precautions in place to stop them from being hyper-violent. But the movie puts the dangerous circumstances alongside
This
characters talking about the potential ethical and dangerous side effects of this new technology. And that in and of itself is pushing this, again, common sci-fi trope of new technology, dangerous, bad, scary.
Well, and that's one more area where I feel like the more recent films in this film have oversimplified the discussion that happened in the original film, where, you know, Malcolm talks about that the level of control they're attempting isn't right, but also one of the big points he makes is that you did this new thing, but you didn't pause. You immediately turned it into a theme park.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where the issue is. Like,
right.
And now he also is demonizing the science very much in that film, but that the film does make the point that the capitalist way you went about it,
mm-hmm.
of you did this amazing new thing,
and now you want to put it on a lunchbox
and just sell it, and that's the issue, is a misuse of this technology,
right?
Not the technology itself,
and not the dinosaurs.
No,
it's what the people are doing with the dinosaurs, with the technology.
And this film starts and ends in two very different weird ways in regards to that message, where it starts very much on like, how in the world can we learn to live in a world with dinosaurs?
Yes. As
if they're this supernatural, like, oh my gosh, the Ghostbusters vaults opened up, ghosts are everywhere, how are we going to function with this new metaphysical reality we live in?
Right. Which is something the movies have always done.
Yeah.
More and more as the franchise has gone on, and especially the Jurassic World franchise, of treating these as though they're not, again, they're monsters. They're not animals. They're not just things in the ecosystem. They are inherently dangerous, unpredictable, bad news.
Yes. But then by the end of the film, the narration explains that, well, I guess we'll just have to learn to live with them.
Yep. And then there's a bunch of shots of, like, now there's ceratopsians just hanging out with elephants, and mosasaurs hanging out with whales. They are just part of the world now, which is actually a really interesting concept.
Yes.
This is they touched on this at the end of the last movie, the notion of what does it mean for this level of invasive species to be unleashed upon the world, which is a really, like, that is actually a fascinating discussion, because it is directly relevant to conversations that we in the real world are having all the time.
Absolutely.
What happens when you introduce a new species to an ecosystem? What effect does that have? Is there a way to remove that species? If you do, is that just interfering and making a mess? Like, well, it's this wonderful, complicated ecological discussion.
Well, and it's also got a very similar feeling to what has happened in a lot of conservation situations, where we have protected this species and helped its numbers recover from past, damages passed over hunting or habitat loss or poisoning, from pollution or whatever it is. But now portions of their previous habitat are suburbs and cities,
right,
and
it's been changed,
housing districts. And so now you have, mountain lions or bears or crocs that are coming back in, and moose and deer coming back into human society as their numbers and range forcibly expand. And so the concept there is a very interesting one, but that's not what the film's about, and they don't actually discuss it in any way. So it's just treated as this, it was a problem, but now it's not, mostly for a happy ending.
Well, and that's kind of the way that a lot of the big scientific premises in this movie happen, is that the movie brings up the question of genetic engineering and medical use and corrupt corporation use of this scientific technology, of invasive species and of ecological change, and what danger do the dinosaurs pose to the ecosystems, and how are they assimilating. And it touches on all these things, but so briefly that it ends up just portraying them in a very, very simplistic way. Dinosaurs are in the ecosystem. That is inevitably dangerous.
Yes.
People are using genetic technology. That is inevitably dangerous. Dinosaurs have been in the ecosystem for a while now. They have inevitably assimilated. Dr. Wu created a cure to fix the locust outbreak, and it inevitably works.
Yep.
It's all touched on very quickly and very shallowly.
Well, yeah, they're scary when the plot needs them to be scary, but then they are heroic when the plot needs them to be heroic. The Dr. Wu locust cure was one of my biggest scientific sticking points, because they have Malcolm in a lecture talking about the dangers of genetic power.
Yes.
And one of the examples he gives, which is a legitimate concern in our real world when it comes to genetic manipulation or over-sterilization and things like that, is the creation of a superbug.
Yes, a superbug in the real world. If we end up accidentally creating bacteria or pathogens that are resistant to our antibiotics and such,
yes,
you could end up with a pathogen that can spread far and wide because it overcomes all of our barriers against it.
We don't currently have a way to stop it. And then the film ends with Wu creating a genetic pathogen to spread among the locusts.
A literal superbug.
A literal superbug to take out the locusts. And the movie makes no parallel between those two of like,
right,
are you sure? Like, there's not even a moment when someone's like, haven't you done enough?
Right.
Like, you already made these giant insects that are causing all these problems. Why do you think manipulating their genes further would have a guaranteed success? But the movie's just like, nope, that's him turning over a new leaf.
Well, it treats it just like the animals in the movie are. They behave exactly and simply the way that the movie needs them. They're monsters when they need to be monsters. They're in danger when they need to be in danger. They're cute for a second when they need to be cute. The scientific concepts are scary when they need to be, or they're hopeful when they need to be. And there isn't much. This is the kind of movie that could easily spur lots of fascinating discussions in classrooms and at, gatherings or on our Discord server, perhaps. But the movie doesn't actually have those discussions.
Yeah. Well, and it's the thing that it's lacking in the two different ends of the spectrum of the science, where here it's scary, but here it's hopeful, is that as far as are shown, none of the science is executed differently. Like, we're not shown that, like, the reason the locusts were so bad is because of a lack of testing. But then the pathogen for the locusts was tested thoroughly. That's a great example of bad science and good science.
Right.
That's what a lot of other things will do that, where we created a monster because we made the serum and our first test was just on a person.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't do that's the Green Goblin scenario. We didn't do clinical trials.
We didn't test it enough.
Yeah. So we created a monster. It's exaggerated.
Sure.
But that is a real issue. There have been multiple times in scientific history where drugs or new technologies have gotten out And then we found out that, yeah, they were not tested thoroughly, and there's actually a really bad issue with them.
That's why there are so many rigorous testing procedures to get things approved or through regulations.
So seeing a careful handling of the science versus a shoddy one would have been interesting.
And this movie does... And now, again, this is a very common trope in movies. A problem was caused by unregulated application of something. Oh, you didn't do any testing and now there's a monster. And then it is solved by unregulated instant application of the good version of the thing, which is not at all unique to this. No. I like the Marvel movies have done that a bunch of times.
Well, it's the idea of it's not the quality of the scientific procedure you used, but the quality of the scientist.
Yes, the intent.
The moral integrity
yes.
of the scientist doing whatever it is.
The bad guy did it, it made a monster. When the good guy does it, it solves the problem and everything's better.
Which is once again one of those common, like that there are good, as in capital G, scientists and bad, capital B, scientists.
Evil.
And the science they create reflects them.
Yes. It brings out who they are inside.
Yeah. This movie has a lot of that.
Well, speaking of scientists, we also like, in our Silver Screen Science discussions, to talk about how movies portray scientists.
Which we have a lot of this time.
So this is something that is interesting because this was one of our sort of lamentations of the Jurassic World franchise up to this point, is that there hasn't been a lot of scientists on screen.
Yeah, there's science.
Right.
But we don't actually see the scientists who did any of it.
The original Jurassic Park trilogy, scientists are the main characters. Each movie, there are at least 2 main character scientists. The Jurassic World franchise has not, but this one, there's a ton of scientists in this.
Well, they made up for the last 2 films.
They sure did, including paleontologists.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Dr. Wu from the first movie, B.D. Wong, being his genetic engineering guy. We have Dr. Malcolm the chaotician. We've got Grant and Sattler, our paleontologists. And we've got Dodgson. We've got Dodgson here, who is the evil genetic scientist in charge of Biosyn, who's doing all the bad stuff.
And they never made it clear how much research, he actually does.
No, he's there to be the generic early 21st century guy in charge of a corporation.
Yeah, where the public assumes that this person in charge of the company that makes tech is also techie and smart and a genius.
Right.
Even though they are not typically the ones doing most of the research.
Right. And it's kind of implied that he is scientifically minded and that he's doing some stuff.
Yeah.
I think he's Dr. Dodgson. So, the implication is there. You can easily make that assumption. But we don't see him do science.
No. It could have just as well been the intent of the film that he is a scientist in title, but not actually the one...
Right.
Doing much of the work.
He's a scientist in title and he's a billionaire.
By trade.
And he's really prominent and eccentric, but he's not actually doing a lot of that work.
Yep.
He's not actually all that impressive.
Yeah.
Now, as far as our scientists go, there's not a ton of scientists doing science.
Yeah, we know they're all scientists because they have doctor in front of their name. Oh, we also have
Dr. Lockwood.
Yes.
Charlotte Lockwood, yes. Who's I just looked down at my list, and she is also featured in this movie.
Who is really the only one that we see discussing any of the science that they're doing, other than Wu wanting to cure the locusts.
Right. Now, we don't get paleontology science in the film. We encounter Dr. Grant at a dig site, but we don't see any of the digging really. That's just where Ellie goes to find him and take him to the movie.
Well, we have one scene of him just giving, I guess, his daily impromptu motivational speech to the grad students and volunteers.
Who are on their phones looking very bored.
Yeah, while he just is like, we dig because in these rocks are truth.
Right.
And that's not paleontology. That's just reestablishing that you are grumpy about living dinosaurs.
Yes.
But it's random.
So, Dr. Sattler, Ellie, is awesome in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
She's cool. She's doing cool stuff. She's determined and motivated, and she's driving the plot. But mostly she's doing, scientific espionage.
Yeah. Well, and she's also working with a conservation a biohazard like investigation
Yes.
group.
Which is really interesting because that is a totally reasonable trajectory that someone like her could take.
Yes.
That she started out studying fossil plants, but has moved into more environmental sciences. That we know people who have done that.
Oh, yeah, and
that's a real thing.
We see a bit of that when she's diagnosing the Triceratops.
Mm-hmm.
That she has an idea of not just fossil plants, but their effects and the interactions between them and the other organisms. So like it's a neat trajectory, but
yeah,
she doesn't actually mention any paleobotany. Like,
no.
There's the fact that she was a paleontologist doesn't really come up, other than that she has a connection to Grant.
Right. Mostly she's doing corporate subterfuge.
Yes. I think the one person who talks the most about their actual field of research is Malcolm.
Yes.
But I don't actually know
gives
if
a lecture.
Anything he says could actually be considered chaos theory.
Yeah, he's mostly just kind of using his platform as a celebrity scientist to philosophize.
Yeah, and morally spout.
Which is also not an unrealistic thing for a scientist in the real world to do.
There's a number of celebrity scientists who have gotten in the habit of just saying things and everyone being like, well, they said it, so.
Yes, that's a scientist.
It's probably pretty deep.
So the ones that we get to see, like, actually involved in their science, kind of, we see Grant say some stuff about dinosaurs.
Yeah.
In sort of this is the expert who's going to give us scientific exposition, which is a very common thing for movies to do with scientists. You are here to tell us things about what's going on. Although Grant doesn't do that any more than anyone else in this movie.
No, the pilot, I think, gives us more specific info about the dinosaurs in the reserve than Grant does.
Yes.
Due to the idea that they've been there before and have insider knowledge.
And
but yeah.
Owen knows a bunch of stuff about the dinosaurs because he's worked with them, and Grant is implied to know stuff about the dinosaurs because he is a dinosaur expert, which is kind of a cool dichotomy.
Yeah.
Those are two different ways in this fictional setting to know about the dinosaurs. So we get just a little bit of that, like, scientist as exposition source.
Yes.
But not too much. We have Dr. Wu, who is the evil scientist who's now trying to do good, and then does it.
Yep.
We've got Dr. Dodgson, who is the evil scientist trying to do evil, and so he does. And then we've got Charlotte Lockwood, who probably is the one whose science is most relevant in the plot.
Yeah.
That we learn that she is the one who discovered the process to clone a human being from a single person's genetic material.
Yep.
It is explained that before she died, she created Maisie as a clone of herself and impregnated herself with her clone baby, and was even able to use her genetic engineering acumen to remove a genetic disease or disorder that she had to take that away from her clone, from Maisie, so that Maisie doesn't have it. And this is plot significant because Dr. Wu says that technology could be the secret to reversing the Locust plague. Like, if we can edit their DNA to stop them somehow, that is what we need to do. And so the way that plot point comes in, and this is where we get tropey, is he says, Charlotte Lockwood discovered this technique, but she's gone, and I need to know that technique, so I need to study Maisie, the clone child that she created.
Yeah, the one that because the specifics is that Maisie was born, then the genetic disease was discovered, and she rewrote Maisie's DNA, living DNA.
Yes.
Throughout her whole body. And that's what Wu wants to do with the Locusts, to basically give them a shorter lifespan and wipe them out, or some aspect of that.
Right.
And that this technique, this technology, this knowledge was lost with
Charlotte.
With Charlotte, and ergo cannot be recreated because the one genius who came up with it is dead now.
And this is a trope. This is a dramatic trope. So obviously, from a movie-making standpoint, it makes total sense why you would do this. The one person who could have helped us is gone, and there's no way for us to figure out how to do it unless we get the MacGuffin that helps us to figure it out. As storytelling goes, that's a great recipe for drama and intrigue.
Yes.
But scientifically, it implies both that Charlotte was an uber genius and the only person capable of coming up with this technique, and also that she was such a bad scientist that she didn't write any of it down.
Yeah.
Or save the data anywhere, that no one has Maisie's DNA on file, or Charlotte's notes on file.
Well, and a bunch of that weirdness to that scenario is because in the last film we were told that Charlotte died and her father cloned her.
Right.
Because he was so distraught, and that Maisie is the grief clone of his daughter. Now we're told that Charlotte cloned herself, and we're never given a reason why, just that she wanted to be a mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess a sperm donor was just off the table for some reason. So it makes sense why she had to keep it secret, because cloning humans isn't legal.
Horribly unethical.
Yeah. Doesn't make sense why she didn't just go to the sperm bank or adopt or any of the other ways that we have single people able to have children.
Yeah. And this really puts her role as the movie's kind of key scientific figure in a weird light, because the movie depicts her as this incredible genius whose brilliance is lost and whose scientific discovery only exists within the body of this child, and putting her up on this pedestal while at the same time not giving any actual explanation for the apparently unethical and irresponsible and pointless, like, she did a thing because she could, but perhaps didn't stop to think if she should.
And yet the movie constantly is trying to portray that she was the moral beacon of genetic power.
Yes.
That, like, she was the one that truly embodied how this science should be used. But we're never shown that.
No. And this brings us back to that dichotomy of when the bad guys do it, it's bad science, and when the good guys do it, it's good science. Even though there's not really a significant difference in what exactly they're doing.
Yes. They're doing pretty much the same thing, but by plot convenience, it is bad when the bad guy does it and good when the good guy does it. And that's basically what happens here. Like, we're never told why it was necessary for Maisie to be cloned.
Mm-hmm.
And then why it was such a secret to rewrite her DNA. Like, at that point, she has film of her pregnant and of Maisie being born.
Yes.
So it's not like no one could have known that this was happening. You have baby clothes.
I'm pretty sure there are other people in the background of her video.
Yeah.
She's in a lab.
So why didn't you just publish on your miracle cure thigh shot?
And that's another very common sci-fi trope, is the notion of an incredible discovery being made, but then remaining hidden until it is uncovered by the right people. And this is one of those science tropes that, again, makes good dramatic sense, but ignores the reality of science, where we publish things and we are collaborative, and that it would be very difficult to keep things like that hidden, and that it isn't common for people to want to keep things like that hidden if you've created a miracle cure or whatever, but also bleeds over into real-world conspiracies about discoveries being hidden from the public or locked behind paywalls, which unfortunately sometimes things are locked behind paywalls.
And some of you may be thinking that, well, but there are there's a historical precedent for that. We have lost the knowledge for certain technology and discoveries throughout history, where, like, Greek fire was one of those classics of we have documents of this thing existing, that can't be put out by water, but we don't actually have the documents of how they made it, and people have not yet rediscovered, or at least for a long time. I don't know if maybe this is an old example, but that concept, a lot of Tesla's ideas are lauded that way, of these genius, amazing things that he took with him because he was an eccentric and didn't write them down. Right. But those examples are typically rare. That's not just like every great scientist has their world-changing invention that, oh, if only it were more than legend, shakes fist. They're rare, they're not common, but also they're often romanticized.
Yes.
Nikola Tesla was absolutely a brilliant inventor, but we have built up this like massive persona of Nikola Tesla as this old-timey Tony Stark.
Yes.
That would have just rocked the planet if, that darn Edison hadn't gotten in the way. Yes, he was wrong, but no, he was not just the brilliant mind that we all missed out on.
Right. And this is a very common science trope of the genius.
Yes.
The one genius who was the only one who could do this and who did it all by themselves. We do this with Darwin and Einstein and Newton and these scientists where we act like they did all their stuff by themselves.
Yes.
And that these discoveries weren't the product of decades of work building upon the work of many, many different scientists, but of one genius who solved all the problems and was fantastic, much like how Charlotte is portrayed in this movie.
And the other reason that personally for me always bugs me so much is that it also implies that had Tesla never been born, we would have never come up. No one else from then to now would have ever come up with the inventions that he came up with.
Right.
That it's only that brain, which was for some reason so incredibly different from the billions of other human brains that have existed since then, could have conceived of those things. And that's not if you show us a picture of a thing, most humans with our combined intellect and creativity, once we know it's possible, that humans are really good at figuring out how to do it. There's a reason that every time like a Olympic record is broken, it's not much longer until someone breaks that record, because now we know, I didn't know I could do it that fast. Well, if you can do it that fast, I'm going to do it this fast. It's not unreasonable that we would just go, oh, I didn't know that you could do that. I'm going to start thinking of how to do that.
This is a common media science trope. Media, both in the sense of like movies and stuff, but like just general popular discussion. Yeah. This shows up in news headlines, this idea of innate genius,
yes,
or the one person who could be the one to do this thing.
Well, you see those conversations of like, will there ever be another Einstein?
Right.
It's like that.
I think it was Stephen Jay Gould who had a line about like, I'm less concerned about the dimensions of Einstein's brain than I am about the certainty that there are other people just as brilliant as that who are working in sweatshops or something in underprivileged environments.
Like, first off, the evidence for innate genius is not good. Like, the evidence is actually against it.
Extremely popular fiction trope.
Yes. There is no scientific support that there are just certain individuals that are just born more brilliant innately than the rest of humanity. That's not a thing as far as we understand.
It's a really handy concept if you want to create a dramatic plot.
Yes.
Or if you want to further eugenicist ideals.
Yes.
Those are the cases where that concept is real handy.
It's good for making superheroes and bigots.
Yes.
And that's about it. So this movie really one big part of the plot hinges on that. Mm-hmm. And they just keep harping on it. And it definitely rings hollow. Just for the fact of like, you have an entire facility of scientists who have somehow figured out how to make effectively pure clones of extinct dinosaurs. And none of them, not a single one of them, can help you figure this out.
And that we are lacking that real world collaborative aspect of science, as we often end up doing in movies like this, where especially since the science itself is secondary at best to what the plot is, the scientists in this movie, just like the scientific concepts and just like the animals in the movie, are mostly plot devices. They show up just long enough to spur on what's happening in the scene or to provide exposition, but we don't really get we don't really get the animals acting like animals. We don't really get the scientific concepts explored in depth in interesting ways, and we don't really get the scientists doing science or demonstrating scientific ideals or behaviors. They're scientists because the plot needs them to be scientists.
Yeah. It's and it makes sense. Like, it is much easier to present a single celebrity scientist versus a lab
Sure.
of researchers. Like, that, for storytelling purposes, one is much easier to work with. But this does really take it to the extreme where every single Malcolm is just the most insightful person when it comes to the complex workings, even when he's just talking about corporate structure.
Yes.
Like, even when he's just talking about how promotions can make you blind,
yes,
he's still correct because he said it.
And that's another common trope with scientists in movies, is it's the person who is correct about stuff.
Yeah. They're so smart that obviously what they must say must be right. And this is actually something that is a very common occurrence, even just in not just like a media, but just a person to person. Like, I've had people say that to me because I'm a scientist.
Yeah, you work in science, you must be super smart and know all sorts of stuff. My dad used to, I'm sure I've said this on the podcast before, my dad used to reach out to me, like text me for asking for medical advice.
Yep.
And I'm like, I'm not a doctor.
Yes.
I have no idea.
Where people have asked me, I'm like, what do you think? I was like, I don't.
Yep.
Please don't ask me that.
And this is why we were always so happy with the fact that in Jurassic Park, which we also have done a Silver Screen Science episode on, where we discuss this, we see specialization where Grant has particular knowledge that he applies and compares with the dinosaurs throughout the movie. Sattler has particular scientific knowledge specifically about plants and ecosystems. And even more so in Tremors, which we have also done a Silver Screen Science episode on, where we have a character asked a scientific question and specifically say, why are you asking me all these questions? I don't know any of these things.
Yes, that due to the typically longer degree of education and higher student loans required to become a scientist, the assumption is that you are just a smarter person now. Which, it's a pet peeve of mine in films, but it's also a pet peeve of mine in the real world. That just portraying that because you have niche knowledge, your brain is superior somehow. And I can't tell you how to do anything to your car. I can change a tire, and I know where the oil goes on my vehicle.
Just like Grant is terrible with technology.
Yes. Like, a mechanic is just as informed as I am, just on a very different topic.
So, from a science perspective, this movie is full of tropes.
Yeah.
This is a masterclass in science tropes in fiction.
Well, this is one of those where it's not just like, oh, there's a bunch of them. The portrayal of scientists is tropes. Like, I can't think of a single example that isn't a tropey example. Right.
It's the evil scientist, it's the scientist who was evil and is trying to redeem himself by creating a single miracle fix. It's the brilliant genius who created a thing and then it was lost. They're very one-note, just like the animals tend to be very one-note, which renders them movie monsters instead of animals. A lot of the scientific things of interest in this movie are touched on very briefly, which leaves them very one-dimensional.
Yeah, very hollow. Which, from a storytelling perspective, you also have a lot of characters and a lot of events that you're trying to get through, so it makes sense that it got pared down, but the fact is that the science and the scientists and the animals are very pared down.
Now, as usual, and if you've listened to us before, you've heard us say this already, none of this makes it a bad movie.
No.
We are firmly of the opinion that you can have bad science and not necessarily be a bad movie. Mm-hmm. We're just discussing this sort of academic perspective on what scientific ideals does this all touch on.
Yeah, if you're using, real world scientific professions and scientific concepts to tell your story, how are you doing that?
Yeah, and how does that reflect in your audience? Mm-hmm. What ideas are you putting out there into the minds of your audience? Like we've talked about before, there are tons of sci-fi movies that still influence the way we think about science.
Yep.
Jurassic Park is one of them. So in Silver Screen Science, we are always interested in sort of the broader concepts. What is there to talk about scientifically? Not just the nitpicking or talking about whether or not we personally liked or hated the movie.
Yeah, or did they get every single species as correct as they could have?
Right. But we also acknowledge that nitpicking the little tiny things in a movie and ranting or raving about how much we liked or did not like a movie are tons of fun.
Yep.
So if you want to hear us rant and or rave about this movie, if you're on Patreon, we will release a More Thoughts episode. But as for nitpicking, at the end of every Silver Screen Science episode, we like to provide ourselves an opportunity, just for a moment, to get real annoyed about something very specific in a section we call our mini rants. Will, what is your mini rant about Jurassic World Dominion?
My mini rant has to do with our introduction to Grant. When Grant is brought into the film, we start with him on the dig site, but the reason he's brought into the film is because Ellie has captured one of the monster locusts and has brought it to Grant to get his second opinion and ultimately pull him into the plot.
Right.
And she says something on the note of like, I needed you to identify it, or I needed a second opinion.
Right.
You know, something like that. And Grant says effectively, I don't remember word for word, but
I think it's abdomen, wings, mandibles.
He goes, it's definitely a locust, abdomen, wings, or abdomen, thorax, mandibles.
Yeah, something like that.
I think it's thorax, because I remember saying abdomen, thorax, mandibles. And then they start talking about, like, what is that, and what...
Right.
But that's the way you showed him ID a locust, is by just naming insect parts.
Insect body parts.
Well,
that's definitely a locust. Abdomen, thorax, mandibles.
I mean...
Check.
Mandibles do rule out true bugs because it doesn't have a siphon mouth, but in no way does that idea like you
That's
might as well have just had it
such a-
say legs, eyes, antenna. Like
That's a bug.
it's an insect, all right, if I've ever seen one.
And like maybe the implication is that he was saying, yes, it has the right abdomen and thorax and mandibles.
Yes.
For a locust, but that's not what he says.
No, it's like you may have been going that he was IDing specific features of those categories.
Right.
But yeah, as you said, that's not what he says. And I personally feel that's being very generous to whoever wrote that line, that was your intention. You could have just said it. That's definitely a locust. It's got all the right features. You know, like...
Right.
It's...
So you didn't pull up a diagram on Google of the parts of a locust and have your actor read them.
Yes, and that, like... also, you could have just had him say, it's definitely a locust.
Right.
I would have trusted that Grant knows how to ID a locust.
Sure.
Without you having him just say insect body part buzzwords. Oh, and that's so early in the film.
It's when we meet him.
It's his introduction, and just like,
yeah.
oh.
Well, as it turns out, Grant saying dumb stuff is not limited to his first scene, because my mini rant is also about a dumb thing that Grant says. They do not do Grant a whole lot of justice in this movie.
No, they don't.
Toward the end of the movie, we mentioned this scene. This is my mini rant, where Owen and Grant and Maisie are looking for Beta, and they're walking through the dark corridor or whatever.
Yeah, the typical pipe room.
Yeah, that all facilities have.
Yeah.
We're down in the engine room. And Grant is saying ominous things about raptors, and he's talking about how the raptors hunt. And he says something to the effect of, we used to think that they disemboweled their prey, but now they know to go for the jugular.
Yeah, we know they're smart enough for...
Yeah, and that's what the implication sounded like.
Well, I
to me
think he says, now we know they were smart enough to go straight for the jugular.
Right. Something to that effect, which, I'm going to pause the quote there for a moment. Going for the jugular is not like a super... This is the Doors all over again.
Yes.
That's not like a super intelligent... Like, cats go for the jugular.
Yep.
And wild dogs go for the jugular. That's just a thing that carnivores do.
Yeah.
That's a common behavior. When you show your big dinosaurs fighting in these movies, they go for the jugular.
Oh, yep.
Like, they bite each other's necks all the time.
Well, and also the implication that that's somehow better than disemboweling. Like, having my throat ripped out and being disemboweled, both are pretty equally fatal. Like, I don't know why you think one is a better way to do that.
Yeah, so they're doing this thing again where they're like, oh, the raptors are scary and smart and terrifying because they do this thing that actually lots and lots of animals do.
Yep.
That weird. But then he continues He says they go for the jugular. Arteries, veins, sometimes both at the same time.
Both of them.
And that is the point in the movie where Will and I stopped being able to keep a straight face.
We couldn't hold in our laughs anymore.
That was the funniest line in the movie. What do you mean both at the same time? What does that mean? Arteries, if they're both in there. If you bite a neck, there aren't predators that are like, oh, I'm a vein specialist.
Yeah. Oh, really? Me? I'm all arteries. That's weird.
It's like lion. That's what lions and tigers, that's what makes them different.
Yeah, yep.
Tigers go for arteries. That's why they're dangerous. You get the spurting blood. No, if it bites you in the neck, of course it's going for both arteries and veins. And it's another one of those where it's like, this reminds me so strongly of the original mini rant.
Yep.
Which was Jurassic Park 3 when he says, sounds bigger. It's such a dramatic line that is clearly meant to be like, this is how we're describing how scary this animal is by having our scientist dinosaur expert, who is supposed to be one of our smartest and most insightful characters, say something utterly idiotic.
Yep.
Sometimes both at the same time.
Well, it's like saying it'll when they bite you, they'll bite straight through your skin, your muscles. Sometimes both.
Yeah.
It's what
that line. I will rewatch that scene when it's on YouTube.
Yes.
To get the specifics of that line, because that is. Do you know what happens when a toad gets struck by lightning? Levels of that is worth remembering.
Yep. Yep. This will be chronicled for all the wrong reasons.
Dear listeners, thank you so much for listening through our science-y discussion of Jurassic World Dominion, the last of the Jurassic World movies?
That's how it's being
Question mark?
branded.
That's what they keep saying. I'll believe it when I don't see it.
Yes.
As always, we do not consider ourselves the final word on any of these topics.
No.
So if you have your own thoughts, or if you disagree with us, which of course, as we expect that many of you will on many counts, feel free to think that way and even let us know. We are on the social medias. We have a Discord server these days where lots of fun conversation and chatter goes back and forth. After this episode comes out, for sure the Silver Screen Science channel will have a bunch of people making comments on their thoughts on this conversation. Please feel free to be part of the conversation. You can find links to the ways to do those things down in the episode description. As we mentioned, if you are on Patreon, we will be releasing a More Thoughts episode for our non-science, just movie thoughts, which in this case we recorded immediately when we got home.
Oh, yeah.
Because we had so many thoughts.
We were full of them.
And besides this, we're releasing episodes on our normal schedule on all of our normal platforms, and it's Croc Month. Sad to say there were no definite crocs in this movie. There was a snake in the movie.
There was a snake.
There was a snake on a spit being cooked.
Yeah.
In that place. But it's Croc Month, the month of June, which means we're doing all sorts of cool croc stuff. By the time this episode comes out, we will also have released our bonus episode, Conserving Crocs, with Dr. Marissa Tellez. Very exciting. We've got extra special croc stuff going on Discord, on social media. We even have a new tier on our Patreon, Crocs and Snakes tier, where you can be part of donations to charitable efforts for conservation. Check out all the stuff as usual. Find all the links down in the episode description. Find our other episodes on all of our Podbean and YouTube and Spotify and wherever you listen. I think that's about enough. Yeah. I think we have now talked about Jurassic World Dominion quite enough.
Yes. Yes, I agree. I think I'm done.
In the words of one of the characters from the movie, I don't remember which one. It might have been Malcolm. It might have been Grant. But as they said, let's finish this.
Agreed.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.